Hey guys, this is Nicole Van Tassel with I Explore Science, creator of I Explore Academy, which is your step-by-step guide to creating your NGSS curriculum. So today's live, we're looking at student discovery. One of the biggest, so when I started with the NGSS, and you might have heard this story before, but I was so focused on switching my content. I thought that I was focused on the disciplinary core ideas, the DCIs. I revamped my whole curriculum. I was rearranging the DCIs. I was connecting them on these like cool thematic units. I mean, it was kind of cool, but I missed the point of actually changing my instruction. I had always been like a hands-on kind of teacher. You know, my students were actively engaged, but they were not always minds-on engaged, and they were not, they definitely weren't discovering the content. That was not something that I was familiar with before the NGSS, and really before I became familiar with the NGSS and the 5E model. Now, whether or not you use the 5E model, this idea of figuring it out, of inquiry and discovery, is a huge part of the next generation science standards. And the shift with the NGSS, it's about more than changing your content. It's even more than just connecting to phenomena, because I know we talk about phenomena a lot. I know we talk about storylines a lot. It's really about changing your role in the classroom. And that's why you can really be a three-dimensional or like NGSS teacher, even if you're teaching an elective, even if your course content goes beyond the scope of the standards. If you're teaching an upper level course that is beyond the basics, you can still be an NGSS or three-dimensional teacher, because it's about changing how you're teaching. Okay, so with that in mind, the question is, well, what does that look like? What does NGSS instruction or three-dimensional instruction actually look like? Basically, a lot of it, and I mean, there's so many moving parts, but the one that we're going to focus on today is this idea of exploration and discovery. That is a huge piece of the shift. Again, there's a lot of moving parts, but that is one of the biggest shifts that teachers do need to make. It's moving away from teaching as telling, which we talked about last week, and moving toward exploration and discovery. But I want to talk about what student discovery actually is, because one of the if you like Google discovery learning and things like that, you see drawbacks to it, like this shouldn't be used as your main instructional method, or like it rejects the idea that there's significant skills that learners should learn, and that you just are like endlessly wandering and seeking for these answers, and there's no direction. And that's not what discovery is in this situation. Maybe in like other situations, maybe whatever. But when we're using exploration and discovery in our NGSS classrooms, we're not just totally doing a free-for-all of inquiry. It's not endless wandering. We're doing it in a very structured way. So today we're going to be looking at like what discovery is not, what it actually is, and then what you, as like the awesome science teacher you already are, need to do to use it correctly so that you can get your students where you need to be. Because we all know, like, endless wandering might be awesome if you had unlimited time and students could just pursue whatever interests they have and all of that. That would be great. But we live in the real world, and we have a certain amount of time with our students, and we need them to meet certain standards and meet certain objectives. And that's on us to get them there. So the balance is, how do we get them there while also incorporating this exploration and discovery? So you absolutely can do it, and we're going to talk about how. Okay, so first things first, I always get ahead of myself, the agenda. That's what we're doing today. The big question is, how do we use discovery to get where we still need to be? Because again, the argument is, it's just wandering. It's just aimless. Our students aren't going anywhere. Okay, so what discovery is not? When you look at like inquiry-based learning and levels of inquiry and all of that, so this picture has some levels of student inquiry. Basically, free inquiry is kind of what a lot of, I don't like saying the NGSS is inquiry-based learning for a few reasons. The first one is, when we look at inquiry-based learning in other classes, like let's say social studies, or in like language arts, a lot of times inquiry-based learning means students come up with a question, then they go research that question, but they just research it, they find the answer by looking it online, and then their research is done and they have the answer. The problem with that in a science classroom is that's not what inquiry looks like in our classrooms. In our classrooms, inquiry is not just asking a question and then going to Google to find the answer. That is a different version, a more student-directed version of teaching as telling, because they're still just going to a text to find the answer. They're not putting the ideas together. Our goal is to have them actually explore and discover the concepts using their reasoning. So that's one of the reasons I don't like to use the term like inquiry-based learning. And it's not because that inquiry-based learning itself is like wrong or anything. It's just that is what we typically think of when we think of inquiry-based learning, because that's how it's been typically used. And again, I know that doesn't mean that's how it's used across the board, but we're just talking like generalities. That's a lot of times what it looks like in other classes. Inquiry projects or like inquiry extension kind of things are basically students come up with a question, go to the internet to find the answer. That is not the type of inquiry we're doing in our science classes. So I like to avoid that term inquiry-based anyway. The second one is along those lines. A lot of times when we use inquiry-based, we think of it as our students are coming up with a question and it's just something that's of interest to them and it may or may not tie to the content and it's just free inquiry. So on this thing here, your students choose the topics without reference to any prescribed like outcome, whatever. They're just choosing and researching whatever they want. It's free inquiry. They're doing whatever they want. That's not what's really happening in our science classes on the day-to-day either, because again, if we had super motivated students that want to just like research everything and discover everything themselves, like, hey, that would be cool. We also live in the real world where we have expectations and we have objectives and we have things to meet. So that's not what discovery is either. It's not just free inquiry. That's what discovery is not. So you have your goals, you have the outcomes you want your students to reach. Let's see. Oh, I avoided inquiry for too long because I was apprehensive of uncontrolled chaos. Yes, it is. And I can't see the system I use. I can't see who said that, but thanks for commenting. Yes, it is not totally uncontrolled chaos. That said, there are degrees of chaos that can happen. So discovery and exploration can be anywhere from, and it can be anywhere from you saying like, here are some, okay, so first of all, you do have your objectives and you have your outcomes and you have your things you want students to reach. So you have, let's get to what discovery is. You have the things that you want students to get to. So you, okay. Actually, I'm going to go back one more second. You have your objectives. You have the outcomes you want them. You have your content. Like, this is what I want them to know. This is what I want them to figure out. From that point, discovery and exploration can be a scale or a spectrum or whatever. You can give them something more structured where you might ask them certain questions and you might guide them toward discovery. And obviously that kind of hand-holding might be more important early on as students are just introduced to this approach, because again, if you just are like, hey, go figure it out, they're gonna be like, what? But as they get more familiar, it might eventually be, here's your materials, here's what we want to know, figure it out. And then and that's like on the other end of the spectrum. So it can fall anywhere in between, and that's okay. It really just depends on like your students and their readiness. But like either way, it's not just free inquiry. It's not just like all these arrows going any which direction. You have a very specific direction. You are planning your activities, and you have planned the activity so that it explicitly gets them where they need to be. It gets them to that content idea, or it gets them to that skill. You've developed the activity so that it is using a particular skill or a particular science practice. Now, one note, like in an NGSS storyline, your students are creating the questions based on the phenomenon you've chosen. So in that sense, they are responsible for creating the questions, but you've chosen the phenomenon. So you have anticipated the questions that they're going to ask. So you've still directed even the questions. Like, yes, they're the one generating the questions, but you chose the questions, so you anticipated the questions that they would generate. So again, you are guiding this whole process. So then what discovery actually is? It's more like, I don't know, I was trying to think of kind of like an analogy. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt. You know, you have your X marks the spot, that's your objective. And you have identified steps along the way that your students need to take to get where they need to go. So some students might need more help getting there, and some students might need less. Some students might just need, like, you just give them the compass and they're like ready to go. So you give them the materials, you give them this is the objective, this is what we're trying to solve, what we're trying to figure out. But other student, and then they're ready to go. But other students might need like checkpoints along the way. Kids love inquiry. Nicole, do you prefer the term problem-based learning? So I think problem-based learning is a little bit different because that's focusing on like a problem. So we can investigate a phenomena, which could just be like anything, like why is the water evaporating here, or where did the water go? That's not really a problem. With problem-based learning, I would actually think like a problem is like this is a societal problem, or this is a problem I'm encountering in my house, or this is like just a problem for me, like that I need to solve. Like I forgot to chill my cookie dough and I need to freeze it really fast. What device could I build to chill my cookie dough? That's like a super silly problem, but it is a problem that students are solving. So I think there's still a difference between problem-based and just like discovery and exploration. Because the problem, you're actually bringing like something we're solving. So it's like that engineering component a little bit, which is awesome to bring in. But it's like another twist to it. And they all go hand in hand for sure. Like even with problem-based, you're still doing all of this discovery and exploration as you come to solve the problem. But yeah, so your students have whether the amount of hand holding really depends on you. Like some students, you give them their compass and then off they go, and other students, you've marked steps along the way and you are framing the activity to help your students get from one place to the next. So how do you do that? Obviously those of you who have students who are just like, hey, here's your compass and go, you don't really have to worry about framing the activity as much as everybody else because your students can figure it out on their own. You just have to get the big frame done. Everybody else has to kind of fill in the pieces as well. So how do you get your students to where they need to be? How do you get them to the X? Okay, so first of all, you need to have a clear objective. Exploration and discovery happens at the lesson level. So you are not looking at your performance. I mean, you are looking at your performance expectation, but that's not your objective at the lesson level. Your objective at the lesson level is like one small piece, or at the exploration level, the lesson level is one small piece of that performance expectation. So if your performance expectation is that, I don't know, organelles work together to support the body. At the lesson level or at the exploration level, they might just be discovering how the cell membrane works to allow materials in and out. That information is going to tie to the bigger performance expectation. It's going to be a piece of the puzzle, but it is not like, you're not trying to have them discover the whole performance expectation in one activity. That's not how it works. If you're teaching climate and the performance expectation is about how, you know, all the parts of climate, all of the factors that influence climate, you're not having them do all of that in one exploration. In one exploration or one discovery type of activity, you are having them look at one specific thing, like that as you move toward the poles, the temperatures get colder. Like that alone. So you have one very specific, very clear objective that you're trying to get students to realize, to discover. What part do you want them to figure out? So you need to have that outlined first. Then you need to figure out like your trail markers. Well, I guess before even that, you need to figure out how are students going to be able to see that. So thinking about my like latitude example, how could I have students literally see or figure out that as it gets colder as you move toward the poles? Well, I could have them look at data. I could have them look at a map with, temperature data shown on it. I could have them track data of different cities or graph data or something like that. I mean, there we go. And that's using a science and engineering practice. So now I framed my activity. And this is the point where you can, if you have kids that are ready to go, maybe that's all you give them and you ask them to figure it out. If you have students that need more help, then you're going to do more than that. If I'm doing the cell organelle thing, maybe I'm doing some kind of like lab observation or demo or something like that, and I'm asking them to do a couple things and then observe what happens. And then maybe, okay, now try it with something different and see what happens. Either way, you have your general, this is how I'm going to get students to see that. And then, again, if your students are ready to go, maybe that's all they have to do. But if your students need more help, this is where you have the trail markers. So you need to ask yourself, like, what do they need to observe to get to observe or ask themselves or ask each other or talk about or connect? What ideas do they need to connect in order to get to the idea that you've brought up? So with my like latitude example, well, first of all, I need them to observe that there's patterns in, well, first of all, I need them to notice that the cities that we might be looking at the data, that the cities that we're looking at or the locations that we're looking at, they're not all on the same latitude, right? They're on different locations on the map. That's one observation I'm going to need them to make. I'm going to need them to make another observation that even though the temperatures change throughout the year, maybe like these ones near the equator never get above or below a certain point, or I guess below a certain point, whereas the ones, you know, closer to the poles never get above a certain point. Like these are some things that I want them to notice. This is the highest this one ever gets. This is the lowest this one ever gets. Maybe I want them to then like see the actual pattern. So these are some just observations I want them to make. And some students might just make those on their own, but a lot of students actually need some help. And those are the types of questions you're going to ask them. Those are the trail markers or like clues you might give them to help guide them to the discovery. So after you've identified the trail markers, like I need them to notice this, this, and this in order to make the connections to get to that aha moment to figure out the idea. Then what clues or supports might your students need? So are they going to need those questions or those prompts to see those things, or will they make the connection themselves? Are they going to need additional information? Maybe your students, like if you gave them the names of some cities or the names of some countries even or whatever, maybe they would know where it is, but maybe other students need to actually see it on a map. Maybe when you are talking to students, maybe they need to see it not even on a map, but on a globe. Maybe your students need some other information that is not necessarily pertinent to like what they're discovering, but is going to help them make sense of what they're seeing. So what additional information do they need to make the connections and bring their ideas like full circle? When you're using discovery, the important thing is, and this is why a lot of people are just like, well, my students, they just don't connect the ideas or they just don't do it. The thing is, your role is really important. Your job is to help them connect those ideas by framing the activity so that they're using the practices and they can use that practice to figure out the idea. But then to actually frame the activity to help them see those connections and help them see those patterns. So you are giving them question prompts and you are giving them like you're making observations yourself. Like if they don't see an observation, one of the things that we tend to do as teachers, somebody gives us an answer and it's the right answer and we jump in and say yes, or they give us the wrong answer or a wrong idea and we jump in and we correct them. When we're using exploration and discovery, we want to refrain from that, and instead we want to give students the opportunity to come to correct their ideas themselves. So what you can do instead is like make an observation. So if someone says, oh, well, I think it's way hotter at the poles here. I don't know why they say that, but you might say, oh, well, I noticed that, like, I don't know, Mexico desert down here, the Chihuahuan desert or whatever is a lot hotter than this desert in Utah, and I can't remember the name of the desert in Utah, throughout like the whole year. So how does that fit into your idea there? so you can just like throw out your own observations and help them to see that observation if they didn't see it, but then synthesize that into their understanding and kind of figure it out from there. But the important thing is that you're giving your students the opportunity to, and really the freedom to, I guess not freedom, like the space to puzzle it out and to keep working through it, even when it gets a little hard and even when they might have like those wrong ideas. But you've framed the idea, you framed the whole activity so that they're not just like a free-for-all of free-for-all exploration where they have no guidance and get frustrated and shut down. You are, you're setting them up for success by really guiding that activity. One other thing that's really important, and we're actually not going to talk about it today, but it's going to be something that we talk about in the free training that I'm doing next week, how to anchor, is the role of relationships in exploration and discovery. So if you are interested in signing up, it's a free training. It's going to be delivered by email. It's how to anchor, bringing relevant NGSS to your science classroom. But we're going to be talking about, so the foundation that all relevant science instruction is built on, and how to frame your unit so your students want to puzzle it out, and then what you can do to ensure long-lasting engagement. And one piece of this puzzle is the role of relationships in your classroom, and actually how relationships are just fundamentally important, not just for classroom management, but actually for student learning. And so that is going to be, we're going to be talking about how relationships play a role in the exploration and discovery process. So if you want to join us, you can register for that at iExploreScience.com/anchor. And I'll drop a note in the comments there. As always, you can, if you're new to the NGSS, I highly recommend you check out the Kickstart AHA Intro to the NGSS mini course. This is like a 4-day introduction to what the NGSS actually looks like in the classroom. So I'm not going to waste your time telling you like these are the science and engineering practices and these are the disciplinary core ideas. My goal is to show you like what it actually looks like in practice, what it looks like for your content, how you can cover it all and not really using three-dimensional approaches, why your students aren't going to be naturally invested in your NGSS units because you're starting with phenomena and you're using your storylines, how you're shifting ownership from the teacher to the student, and it's all about that exploration that we've been talking about here. And lastly, there's always an open invitation for you at iExplore Academy, your step-by-step guide for building your NGSS curriculum. We take purchase orders, ask your school district to fund your program if you're interested. I also do some school and district programs directly, but I would love to work with you and help you design a curriculum that is really relevant to your students and built on phenomena that is going to connect with and engage your students, and just like walk you through the whole process from bundling your standards to developing your storylines to crafting your assessments. That's what I do at iExplore Academy. That's what I do with our district and school programs. So if you are interested in either of those, if you have questions about any of those, please just reach out and I will be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks for tuning in today. If you have any other questions about discovery or exploration, you can go ahead and drop those in the comments and I can take a couple minutes to answer those before we sign off. All right, well, I don't see anything. If anything else pops up, I will definitely just type a little reply. But thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. I will catch you guys later, and I will post a link for how to anchor in the comments if you're interested in joining us for that free training next week. I'll catch you later. Bye.